Hello, guys, and welcome to my 3 round final mock draft. With all teams, obviously. And this is going to be with trades, obviously, as things that I could perceive going on and happening in the draft. I'm not, if I feel like a trade needs to happen, I'm not going to be hesitant with it. I will just let you know. And it's like, I am going to do this, how I think that every team, has been kind of thinking. I think there are some obvious picks that are going to go on and, mostly early on, obviously. But without further ado, let's start this thing. So we have obviously the Titans. I think it goes without saying they draft Cam Ward here. And then we go on to the Browns. With what I've heard about the Browns, I think that they're a funny organization. They haven't been ran the best. While it might be a thing where they're like, oh, should we draft Shador? Why is he dropping so close to the draft date type of thing? And I think they're falling in love with Travis Hunter, which how can you not? They draft him here. The Giants, I think it goes without saying that you go Abdul Carter here. Number 2 in the draft boards and that sort of thing. I think that Abdul Carter, there's no way that he makes it, even, I guess even close to 5, even though this is obviously as close to 1 as it is to 5, type of thing. The Giants grab him, and they give themselves a true pass rush 1 guy opposite of Kayvon Thibodeau. We go on to the Patriots, and this is where our first trade will be. I do think that, there is a chance that they go Ginty, but I don't see it type of thing. And it's like, if we trade back type of thing, 2 pick 8, you're still pretty safe, with who you want to pick. So we're going to trade back with Carolina, and we're going to add, 4 picks to get up this high with who's available type of thing. Carolina's gonna trade up here, and you're gonna get some other draft capital. Perhaps not, definitely not their second rounder. I don't think that you're that stupid if you're Carolina, but you're gonna go and you're gonna get a 3rd, and then you're gonna get a later round pick as well, because obviously this is a pretty big jump with big value. At the beginning here. And I think, this is going to happen. And then you move up, and if you are Carolina, you are going to go ahead and you are going to grab T-Mac. You are going to grab T-Mac because you really need more weapons on that offense. And while I think you drafted a good wide receiver last year in Leggett, I think that T-Mac can do just what he does, but potentially even better. We'll see, obviously. I do think, people keep on saying that T-Mac is going to fall. I just don't see it. I think that the size is allure enough to make that this guy could be a menace potentially. And I think that, Bryce Young kind of proved that they're like, hey, we want to get this kid more weapons. And it's like we missed out at Abdul Carter, if he happened to drop past here, which I don't think he does. Type of thing. And, we grab T-Mac, here to address our number 1 need. Now, moving on to the Jaguars, I think the Jaguars are a team where it's like, it's been very odd, that they're a very odd ran organization. And I do think that, who they have as at GM is high on corners. And this is going to be kind of my first bold high projection pick where it's like not crazy high or anything like that. But I actually think that they grab Jahdae Barron here. I think they grab Jahdae Barron to address their corner room. Kind of funny to me how it doesn't say it's a need here, but safety's definitely a need. Interior's a need. A lot of people have Mason Graham going there, which I think would be fine. I do think though that they're kind of oddly run, and I think that could come back to bite them in the butt. On draft night, and people are like, oh man, it sucks to be a Jaguars fan. We wanted this guy or this guy type of thing. And then we get to the Raiders. The Raiders, I think, go Ginty here. I think it's just kind of like Pete Carroll wants his running back, and he's like, here we go, type of thing. To alleviate some of the pressure off of Geno Smith from having to throw for the amount of yards that he has early in the game. Then we get to the Jets. The Jets need line. You have Will Campbell here. Well, Mason Graham would be scary to pair with Quinnen Williams. I just don't see it being a thing that's like, hey, this makes our team so much better. So they're going to go Campbell here. And then we do get back to the Patriots. The Patriots are going Membu right here. He has the arm length. He has the size. And he's, overall, lineman 1B or 1A, depending on how you look at it. Perhaps Will Campbell is, 1B. But it's like you grab Membu here to start to shore up your O-line while having added capital later in the draft. We get to the Saints. The Saints, to me, will go Mason Graham here. And the reason I say that is because they have an aging defense and they need the best player available. This isn't a team that's going to change overnight. They can't really improve this team super easily. They could potentially trade down if there was some team, like Mason Graham, but then people are like, hey, this is just why, we're a team that's always going to be aging and we're going to get picks that don't work out potentially. And we're always going to be trying to keep these guys who have been producing for the team for far too long. You go and you grab Mason Graham right here. Then we get to the Bears. The Bears, to me, they need D-line. Their run defense was a little bit shoddy last year at times. Was only, even the fact that they have safety on here. You could go Malachi Starks, but I think that's just too high, and there's other safeties in this draft. I'm going to have them go Walter Nolan right here because I think it's kind of a no-brainer. And it's like, I think that, people are kind of low on Walter Nolan, but it's like this guy can be brought in and he can do, and while, this is probably why, it's because he didn't do much his first 2 years, but he had a crazy good year last year. And he's got great size, is still very young. You go and you draft Nolan here if you're the Bears, kind of no-brainer of a pick, in my opinion. Then we get to San Fran. To me, San Fran doesn't have anybody here that they should really be like, yeah, we're going to lock in and we're going to go this guy, type of thing. I mean, you could go Will Johnson, but to me, the quickest way to kind of reset your defense and to make it super effective after bringing back Saleh is you get another pass rusher. Now, is there a pass rusher you take right here? No, I think you can trade down. You can trade down with teams, and who would be a team that would want to be trading up to grab like a Jihad Campbell potentially or a Will Johnson? I honestly think that, the Cardinals always seem to be kind of high on their DBs and that sort of thing, and they have in the past, and I think they're really they are actually missing kind of DBs that you want. We're going to go ahead and we're going to trade with the Cardinals. Are they not here? Okay. Maybe the Cardinals aren't here. We'll see if we can still trade with them. They kind of say that they're not interested type of thing. So okay, perhaps this isn't the team that we trade with. So who's interested here? The Ravens, I don't see them being, kind of interested type of thing. The Falcons, potentially, I guess, the Falcons could trade up. Maybe that is what we do here. We have them trade these two. And it's like, but the Falcons don't have a lot of draft capital. So what are you willing to trade? Are you willing to really trade up to get a couple of spots? I think that they're a pretty close to complete team, the Falcons type of thing. but it's like you look at, kind of what their needs are. Center, wide receiver is kind of outlandish to me if you have good QB play. And it's like, I think you have a sneaky good wide receiver core. Edge is definitely a need, and so is linebacker. We are going to go ahead and offer this trade so that the San Fran can get a bit more picks. And then what we're going to do here is we're going to grab Jahad Campbell, a guy who can help you in a plethora of ways for the Falcons, with pass rushing potentially. You can always get a pass rush later. And then it's like, and also play linebacker, which is also a need, type of thing. Then we move to the Cowboys. I actually am convinced that that Jerry Jones, he's not the one to trade back. He's one to just take the player and kind of own it. He's going to go Luther Burden. I've seen Golden mock to them, but it just doesn't seem like the kind of player that, Jerry, would go. Perhaps he would just because he's a Texas Longhorn, but I think that Burden just adds a dynamic and versatility that would make defensive coordinators like have headaches when they're planning for CeeDee Lamb and Luther Burden III. Moving on to the Dolphins, who to me their biggest need is O-line. You do need defensive interior on this team as well. Perhaps Kenneth Grant would be there, Josh Simmons potentially, Kelvin Banks, I think, type of thing, but this is a team that I think, they really need, I wouldn't say they need a ton of picks. I think this team could be very good unless they do trade Ramsey and Tyreek, which it seems like Tyreek is staying. But, looking at this, there's, I guess, a couple of teams that are wanting to trade right here, which is, kind of interesting to me because, like, who would you be going for? Maybe you do. I am actually going to go ahead and I'm going to draft Will Johnson. I'm going to draft Will Johnson to the Dolphins because they're going to need a guy if they don't have, Jalen Ramsey because they said they're shopping him. And I think he's a potential trade candidate on draft night. And it's like, I think this one's pretty set in stone. We're going to go Tyler Warren on the Colts, who gives a weapon to whoever the quarterback is. I think that your O-line is good enough. I just think that you need kind of a game changer of a weapon besides Jonathan Taylor, who I think is good, but isn't great, type of thing. Has his moments. And then we get to, San Fran, who we obviously traded back 5 picks with. And to me, at this point, it's kind of like, do you go either Mike Green or Ezeraku? I think Mike Green, good measurables, good run defense too. I think he could be a very invaluable kind of guy. The whole he went to Marshall type of thing. Kind of interesting. He's still fairly young. I think Ezeraku's a guy who could also go, to them. Mike Green, a little bit higher pass rush win rate. They both went to smaller schools, though, type of thing. I'm actually going to go Mike Green. I think the quickest way to helping your defense, and making it better is by getting a dominant pass rush. And you already have Nick Bosa as pass rush 1. Adding Mike Green, who can at least, be consistent or flashy, is going to help you. And then you don't need DB as much because these QBs, if they have less time to throw, that makes your DBs look that much better, in my opinion. And that's the kind of mentality I would have the Niners to take, is to be like, we're going to trade back, but we're going to get Mike Green or Ezeraku, type of thing. Now we have the Cardinals, who, to me, I feel like it would make sense for them to trade ahead because like I said, I think they're high on, CB. I think they're high, on that sort of thing, and it's like, but they lost out on Johnson and Green type of thing. I think that they go Ezeraku here, and I think that, they're very happy with that, even though I think that they could definitely, move back and have some other guys for the defensive interior and the edge. I think they definitely need edge. I don't think that they forced much pressure last year in hindsight type of thing. I think they take Azaraku because they're worried, oh, hey, well, we want one of these premier guys. Then we get to the Bengals. The Bengals, have 3 in the first round, type of thing. To me, they really do need a linebacker and D-line. I think for the Bengals, I'm going to actually have them take Kenneth Grant. I think, you could have them trade down and they could take like a Kelvin Banks or something type of thing. But I think they want to go for kind of the dominant, guy. Now I'm kind of actually second guessing myself. Perhaps they don't and they do trade back. Is there anybody that actually wants to trade up that would make sense to trade down with? So there's Pittsburgh, could go Josh Simmons, but has kind of a conflicting interest to me, with this team. So it's like looking at this, I think that the Bengals wouldn't mind grabbing a guy like Josh Simmons that they think, hey, this guy can come in and he will be better despite his injury type of thing. Then we get to the Seahawks. I don't really see the Seahawks grabbing anybody right here, to be honest with you. Could they grab Golden? I do still think that they need a wide receiver that is a field stretcher type of player. Jackson Smith-Njigba to me, has good speed, but he's more of your find the open spot and wait for it kind of guy. Being a smart player that he is, Golden would kind of be your blazer. Because you don't have Metcalf anymore. You signed Cooper Kupp, who's also not a blazer. You do have MVS, but it's like, are you going to keep him for the long haul, being that he's a 30-year-old, type of thing? Matthew Golden could kind of serve as more of a gadget guy, scheme him open, jet sweep, do a lot of things, that could be that no other wide receiver could really do on your team type of thing. I'm actually going to have him grab Golden. I think it would be a big brain move that, hey, we sign these wide receivers, but we know they're not the long-term solution. So we go and we grab Golden, who, ran a 4.29, right? And, is a guy that doesn't, also has good contested catch rate. Then we get to the Buccaneers. The Buccaneers, I think it is a no-brainer here. You need a guy who's edge, linebacker, and DB. You kind of addressed it with Hassan Reddick. But you have a guy like Jalen Walker, who it's like you grab here, who can rush off the edges, inconsistent, but also plays linebacker very, very well. Now looking at the Broncos to me, they really do need that running back, to me, that is going to be that guy that's going to be a game changer, and it's going to help Bo Nix because he's not going to have to pass for everything, type of thing. Is there any other guy right here that's kind of, hey, we grab this dude and he's really, really, really good? I think that, Igbuka maybe. You could even grab Colston Loveland, which would be interesting to say the least. But, I'm kind of looking at this team and I'm kind of thinking like, there's other wide receivers that I think you could grab, type of thing. I think you could even use safety on this team. And that's actually what I'm going to have them do. I'm going to have them take Malachi Starks right here to kind of be their safety. I know it says he's not a need, according to PFF, but I think they do need a safety. I think that they, can have a guy who can come down and can give the other team like scheme fits with how many sacks they got last year, and then can play box and cause, disruption and confusion amongst a lot of QBs. So we're going to have them take Malachi Starks here, and, that's going to be their pick. Now, we have the Steelers, who I think really, really need tackle. They need O-line. They are just a team that needs O-line. I'm going to have them take Kelvin Banks. I think this one's very much a no-brainer. Then we look at the Chargers. They take Kenneth Grant. Kenneth Grant, who's ranked a lot higher, is very, very good. fits the size, fits the need that they have on their D line. They're kind of revamping it, and next year they're likely to have to address edge, type of thing. They take Kenneth Grant this year to become a stalwart on that defense. My Packers, I don't buy that they're going to go Igbuka. I don't. I don't think that they're going to draft a wide receiver in round 1. And it's like, the thing about it is that, while it might be just draft day mind games by Gutekunst, he has said that he wants a lot of picks. Now, there are definitely some teams to me that I think will trade up here to try and get certain players. I think Gray Zabel's kind of, he's ranked 28, but I think he's projected higher. I think he's definitely a guy that it's like, hey, we have teams like the Texans who need O-line. The Rams could use O-line. You could even argue that like Washington wants O-line. Now let's look and see who's actually like interested, here. So the Browns, it's interesting type of thing. It says that they're interested here, but it's like their next pick is 33. That kind of is who I'm like, maybe type of thing. I honestly think that, you're kind of looking at this and you're kind of looking at, who was drafted here. We still have Shador on the board, which I think, there is the definitely high potential that he drops with the kind of talent that like is early in this draft. That it's like, oh, we're going to look like fools if we draft Shador and we have no plan and we just look like, oh, we're wasting this kid's talent type of thing. So it's like, I do think that, potentially the Packers trade down to 33 out of the first round, from this pick, and they shore up on other picks as well, and it's like the Cleveland Browns, who have 10 draft picks, can even with the sad state of the team, I don't think they're as far off as like, you need 10 picks to hit in order to be a good team, potentially just because of the conference you're in. But it's like, you're going to want this. And it's like, if you get your QB of the future, then, hey, it's not that bad. And you still have, you have a pick you've already made, with a position of need that's crazy with Travis Hunter. You go up, you trade here, and, the Packers are happy getting an additional pick with this. And then I'm going to go ahead and you say, Shador Sanders gets drafted here to the Browns, and that's where he goes at pick 23. Now, the Vikings, I don't see them taking anybody here. They could draft, edge. Halfback is kind of a need, but there's a good amount of halfbacks in this draft. And I think the Vikings, with a crazy low amount of picks here, I just don't see them being like, hey, we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna trade this pick. Now, a team that do we have? So the Commanders aren't on here, which is, interesting. It does say my Packers would be interested. There's no way. The Raiders here, not really interesting. The Rams, it kind of doesn't make a lot of sense, except for the fact that I think the Rams, I think it would be interesting with the Rams, is that it's only a couple picks, but like, perhaps you're going and you're trading down and you're getting, a couple of these other later round ones, and, the Rams, to me, they could easily trade up to this pick and be like, we need a guy that's going to be a game changer for our team, and we're going to grab Loveland. I think Loveland is going to be a hot commodity, and it could be a battle in these last 8 picks, because I think that there's teams like Kansas City, like the Commanders. I even think potentially that the Ravens could be interested if they traded. It's kind of a skim, a very slim kind of theory type of thing. But it's like the Vikings trading back and getting more picks because they only had 4 total. makes a lot of sense to me. And it's like if they only had to trade back 2 to get another pick, I think that that's more than possible. And then we get to the Texans. So they say they need a wide receiver. I think they easily need O-line way more than wide receiver. It's like you still have, Dell's hopefully going to come back and be the same. Nico Collins is, very, very good. It would be crazy to say, but I think they could be in on Loveland, potentially as a sneaky Loveland pick team. But I'm actually going to go and I'm going to have the Texans grab Zabel because I think he's overall a guy who could be. He looks like he's going to be a good NFL prospect. And it's like he's the right direction to rebuilding that O-line that you've essentially been like, oh, we're letting everybody go, type of thing. Then we get to the Vikings again. We do have a Marion Hampton here. But to me, it's like, I think that your halfbacks are good this year. That it's like, oh, we bring back Aaron Jones. We get the guy from San Fran. Do we really need this guy? And it's like we have a total number of picks is 5 at this point, or sorry, 6, because we grabbed a couple of other ones. Who would be a team that would want to move up here? I don't really think there's the player that you're kind of like to die for type of thing here. That teams are going to be like, oh, we need to grab this guy and we need to grab him now type of thing. And it's like looking at this. What do we do as a Vikings team? Could we trade super, super far back to like 43 to San Fran? But would San Fran want to do that? I doubt it. The Jets, I don't really see them needing, who's at this available pick here. And I'm kind of like, I don't really think you're going to find, a trade target right here. But if you're looking at the guys, I think Norman Lott would be, a good addition for this team of good size, potential and that sort of thing. And while he's been increasing each year type of thing, he's had a very good pass rush win rate for a bigger guy. And it's like his run stop rate, not the best, but not terrible. So to he seems like a Vikings pick right here to help them start to shore up their defensive interior, to be honest with you. Looking at the Ravens. So the Ravens, to me, edge definitely a need. I actually do see them going James Pierce Jr. here. I think James Pierce Jr. going here to them and falling a little bit past, what his projection is. I think he adds a guy, and we have back-to-back Tennessee picks. Looking at the Lions to me, kind of need an edge, and I could definitely see them jumping up potentially higher to grab one of these two, in the draft if they're like, oh, we really want one of these guys, but I think, they're also a team that it's like, oh, we have a good number of picks to our credit. I guess a normal amount of picks, and it's like with not a lot of fixes for this team. So looking at this, who is a guy that we can grab? Who's a guy that can come in and be a dude that we can depend on? I'm actually going to have him go Egbuka because I think they'll pick up a pass rusher later in the rounds, as none of the ones that they potentially want are available. Actually, I'm thinking, God, I keep second guessing myself. I think Shamar Stewart would be a guy that could come in, and they say edge, but he could play interior as well. So it's like, very explosive, very disruptive. You get another guy that's, that's tall, 6'6", and then you have Hutch, who's like 6'7", 6'8", or whatever the heck it is, that he is, and you get that length. I think, we're going to go Shamar Stewart here, and he's going to be kind of that pick that's like, oh man, I really hope that Campbell can't mold this guy into a menace, type of thing. Looking at Washington, they need O-line. I really think that they need O-line. I don't think that they're going to be willing to kind of trade back. I think they are also a team that needs wide receiver. I think Igbuka could, really benefit from learning from Scary Terry, even though I think he's already a pretty damn good receiver, for this draft. Good length, good size, strong. And it's like, obviously draft fatigue type of thing, but, passes, most of what you want in a wide receiver. I'm actually going to have them go Igbuka here for the Commanders, and then we get to the Bills. The Bills, to me, you really want linebacker. You probably, you might want cornerback. You might want edge. There's not really an edge here that I'm like screams. You could go Michael Williams, though. I think Michael Williams, provides a very good size, very, very spry young man who, didn't have a good pass rush win rate, I guess, but he seems to fit that mold. And perhaps, and he's always running hot. Does, elite run defender seems like, something that you would also want on the Bills, as, this could be a guy you plug in because you like to play nickel so much and it has that size. We're going to actually go Michael Williams here. Then we get on to Kansas City. So Kansas City, my theory about them is that, there's the potential for them to try and trade up and snag Loveland because I think that he is a guy that could be on their radar to take over once Kelsey is kind of gone, or maybe even this next year, because Kelsey clearly was not the same at the end of last year and then the postseason, obviously. Guard tackle needs, I think, it's one of those things to me that, like, you kind of look at the players available and it's like Winston injury concerns. Obviously, Connerly is, kind of a later round kind of thing. Edge, you don't really need. Cornerback would be interesting, if you want like a very lockdown DB room with, your safeties being kind of, I wouldn't say subpar, but Justin Reed moved on, who was good for you for many, many years. I'm just going to go Josh Connerly Jr. here, even though I know that the Chiefs do they do a pretty good job of coaching up their linemen, so they could easily go one later. I think Josh Connerly Jr., though, the thing about him is that, he improved a lot this last year at left tackle, which was definitely a concern for them last year. So could come in and, had a strong end to the season for the most part, besides a couple of big name schools. So it's like you go there and, hey, this is what, we have. Then we get to the Eagles. Now, I have said that for the Eagles, you could go edge. Nick Scorn, I think, is an option. I think Amenor would be a very intriguing option. You get a guy who it's like is intelligence and has strength, fits kind of the mold that I think that they want as the gritty, tough team that the Eagles are, and it's like 6'2", 210, has, physical wide receiver. I think this would be a hot pick for the Eagles while I would hate it, obviously, as a cheesehead, but I think this is the guy that they go. I think he's a gritty dude, and I think, this happens. Then we get to the second round. We have my Packers pick. Here's legitimately what I think we do. I think we grab Jaden Higgins. I think the Packers have a semblance of, what they did years ago where they draft Christian Watson at the beginning of the second round, another guy who's tall, 6'4", type of thing. Not obviously not a blazer type of thing, but it's like, maybe you need that guy that's kind of a jump ball dude for when, Jordan Love wants to get spicy again, type of thing. And you don't have so many of those on the offense. You have Malik Heath, who it's like, I'm sure most of you don't even know who he is. But moving on, we have the Giants. The Giants who picked, as we all know, Abdul Carter. So they addressed edge, which, they say isn't a need, but I think is, it's kind of nuts that they say that isn't the case type of thing. I think this is a team that does need O-line, but you don't really have that available here. You have Donovan Jackson, Booker, and, nobody really else within, many, many picks. So who's kind of the guy that's available here that you want to go? I think you go Trey Amos. I think your DBs were scrappy, and I think with a better pass rush, it won't be as bad. But I do think you kind of need to shore him up and maybe get a guy that, can compete with those other young guys that you have. The Titans, we drafted Cam Ward. And the other needs of the team, in my opinion, are that they really do need a wide receiver. They need edge. I think in terms of edge, I think you go Nick Scourton here. I think Scourton, comes in and with a very solid pass rush win grade and great size. I think he can come in and who's a young man can grow, into this defense and be a very strong player eventually. Potentially right away, but at least eventually. Moving on to the Jaguars. We had them draft Barron as kind of the spicy cornerback pick that I feel like the Jaguars have made in the past. But looking at them, we have wide receiver, tight end. I think that they do need, other wide receivers. And I think it's like you're kind of looking at these picks right here. I do think you need interior as well, despite, kind of running a weird layout of your defense D line last year. And I think that they're going to fix that this year. So what do we really go right here? What is kind of the play, type of thing? I don't think that they double down on CB, although it would be so wild if they went. I mean, I think that they could go Benjamin Morrison, if I'm being honest with you. I don't know if Jack Beck is really the guy that you're like, hey, we bring this dude in and, we have him be the guy because obviously everyone's going to be teeing off of their rookie that they had last year. That was their deep threat and did a crazy amount of things. So maybe Jack Beck has breathing room and the ability to make a difference on this, but I just don't see it either. I'm going to see if they can trade back to a team that is kind of a halfback needy team, right here. Is there anybody that wants this pick that is halfback needy? Not really. So, perhaps they're stuck with it, and that sort of thing. Or is there one of these other teams that really needs DB? Perhaps we do trade with, Philadelphia. It's quite a bit of a dip, but you look at, and it's quite a bit of a dip, I guess, but you would be able to get a lot of picks for this, so it's like, look at, obviously crazy here. Perhaps you're trading up and you're getting a couple of picks, to get some very substantial talent. And then heck, we'll throw in, and even a late round pick type of thing. We'll see. They take it on Philadelphia, and Philadelphia kind of moves up here. And I'm going to have them take Benjamin Morrison, who I think, fits on their team. And then it's like we look at, the Raiders here. The Raiders, to me, really need a corner. We had them take Ginty. We have 2 more picks in the next 2 rounds. I'm going to have them take Revel as kind of being Pete Carroll's Richard Sherman 2.0. Obviously a little bit more lean and that sort of thing, but great athleticism and great size, and that sort of thing. Now we have the Patriots, who, as we know, took Membu in round 1 to address their tackle situation. I think that this is a team that really does need like kind of a running back. I'm going to have them take Hampton. I'm going to have them take Hampton to be that kind of workhorse and be that Tar Heel difference maker. And then it's like, and then you take them from the Bears, who I think would definitely go Hampton here. I think that, we obviously had them draft Walter Nolan, who, can shore up the interior of D-line, I think the Bears would be more than willing to take Kevin Winston on a flyer right here, despite the injury concerns, because their safety play hasn't been the best. You know, they have, I think, good DBs, but their safety play hasn't been there. So, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if they took Kevin Winston Jr. here. Now, the Saints, we had to take Mason Graham just because I think it's important, to address an aging defensive interior. And it's like, looking here, I think they would actually be a team that would be willing to take Jack Beck, as a guy who's, taller, a little bit bigger, and you need to get, some more depth at wide receiver that got injured as heck, last year. We got the Bears again. I honestly think that this would be a spot where potentially the Bears are like, we need to take, a step back and, potentially not actually. Now I'm kind of thinking that it's like, I don't think it's outside the realm of possibility that you draft a D end or a guard right here. And I think that you traded for, a very good guard who's, not crazy old, but it's like maybe you want more of a defensive interior to be able to run the ball up the middle, which we know Ben Johnson did with Gibbs and Montgomery in Detroit. So looking at that, I'm actually going to have them take Tyler Booker here to shore up their O-line, on the interior, and hopefully be a powerhouse of running it up the middle and between the tackles. The Jets, we had taken a lineman. This is a team that does really need a wide receiver. I think they also need, we had them take a tackle, defensive interior, a need slightly, type of thing. But I also think that edge is a need on this team. I think Landon Jackson could, really, really find a place on this team. And while he doesn't have the craziest pass rush win rate, he does also help them with their abysmal run game as a very good run defender. So it's like, you got good hurry production last year. Perhaps he can, continue to improve like he has been under Aaron Glenn. And he kind of fits that size of like, a Hutch style of player, which, it is something that, appeals to some of these guys that they're like, oh, we're going to try to replicate in a copycat league. So we're going to have them take Landon Jackson, to address their edge after we addressed, O-line in round one. Now we get to San Fran, which we addressed edge with. I think this is a team that definitely looks like it could use a safety. It could also use a cornerback. I see Hairston being a guy that goes there and, helps that DB room, a lot. Then we get to the Cowboys, who we had draft burden. This is a team that does have running back needs, in my opinion. I also think that they really do need edge. And it's like, what better players to look at than like Scatabo and Princely here. I think Scatabo potentially goes there as well. I think that, but then I think about Princely and I think, opposite of Micah Parsons. Who knows what's going to happen with him? A guy who, is a very, very similar size. So I'm going to go with Princely here. I think it addresses more of a major need type of thing. I think it is something that will overall help this team with their pass rush. And it's like you did lose, I forget his name now, to the Seahawks, and he left and he had some, words for Micah Parsons. So now we have this pick. We have the Colts, who we had take Tyler Warren in round one. So I think that it is a very big boon to them and that they really need safety play. We're going to have them take Xavier Watts. Xavier Watts to the Colts right here. And then we're off to the Falcons. The Falcons, who we had to go and get Jahad Campbell, they only have one more pick in the next 2 rounds, type of thing. Perhaps this is a spot where you're going to trade, but I just don't see that. I actually really do think that they're either going to go, they're going to go one of these defensive interiors or, edge rushers right here. You don't really have any need for any of these other guys. I mean, if you really want to reach, I guess you could go TJ Sanders, but we're going to kind of look this over. You got rid of Grady Jarrett, who, to me, it wasn't a bad move, but it's like, that's a big dude and a big hole to fill. Derek Harmon only had 1 year of really good production type of thing. Braden Swinson is kind of your guy that it's like, oh, if you want really good pass rush, you grab this dude. But it's like, I honestly, and it's like, while they may want an edge here, I think there are edges down the road that you could go for type of thing. But looking at defensive interior, Darius Alexander, he obviously was one that was getting, very good pass rush here. I'm actually going to have them take him here. I think that you need a guy that's going to be able to play the run, has, solid size, and, is a little bit older type of thing, but it's like you need a guy who's going to be able to produce on multiple levels and be a stalwart on your defense after the loss to Grady Jarrett, who was on the decline with age, but had age and experience that it's like it's hard to replace. So you want to get a guy who's kind of an all-around and able to do it, so you're not having a glaring hole at the start of your season. Moving to the Cardinals. The Cardinals here, we need D-line. Tyleik Williams, to me, would be very, very good. We obviously drafted an edge in round 1, so we don't really have much concern there. CB is a concern, but I think that with a better sort of D-line, I think that that's going to be a little bit less of a need. Obviously, like I said, not a crazy, pass rush win rate here, and then it's like we look at Harmon, higher, worse run grade. But I personally think that it's like you need a guy like Harmon to come in and, provide pressure, who can also learn from Calais Campbell, who they brought back, this year. So it's like you pick up Harmon and, he's your plug and play guy, for years to come, hopefully. Now we've got the Dolphins, who we had draft Will Johnson because the cornerback rumors, I think, are more than true. I think that Ramsey's likely gone, potentially. And there will be some team that really wants to trade for him. But it's like the O-line is something. I do think the defensive interior is very, very important, type of thing. And I think this is the team to grab Tyleik Williams. I know we've been on this, defensive interior stint now for 3 picks in a row, you guys. But I think these are teams that really, really need it. I think they are, and these guys fall into this kind of spot and getting drafted in a row, more than possible, I think. And then we look at the Bengals who we had take Josh Simmons to address their O-line. We have Braden Swinson here. We also have Demetrius Knight and Schlesinger, type of thing. I guess I don't know much about Tua Molau. I probably butchered that. Good run defense grade, which I know they struggle. I mean, the Bengals defense struggled with everything last year, type of thing. Not as crazy of a pass rush win rate that you would want, but had really good production. Pass rush snaps 356, and he had 15 sacks, hits, hurries, and 1 batted. This is a guy who looks like you can bring in and has the size you want on your D-line, and especially with the trade rumors, probably not being warranted since he hasn't been moved, but you want to be able to, make sure that you're not completely at the mercy of every player you have on your team who wants a contract. Now we get to the Seahawks, who we had take Golden, because I really do think that even though they brought in Kupp and they brought in MVS, JSN is really the only one in your long-term plans as far as I'm concerned, or should be. Unless Kupp is somehow able to turn to that crazy form he had when he won the Triple Crown, which is just highly unlikely. You wanted another wide receiver. Looking here, I do see, and they say they only need center and guard. I beg to differ. Their whole line, they kind of need help with. I see Donovan Jackson. I think Donovan Jackson, has the size you need. And it's like he has day one starter potential, type of thing. First team All Big Ten selections, you go Donovan Jackson here. He's a guy that, can come in and plug and play. And while left tackle, he only played 529 snaps total, he played elsewhere. So it's like a versatile dude that you can bring in and can hopefully help on your O-line. If you really don't need tackle, plug him in at guard where he's played. Now we've got the Broncos, who we had to take in a safety in round 1. This is where Cam Scatterbo gets drafted because they need that running back to help protect Bo Nix with a solid running game and a more balanced offense. Looking at the Seahawks, we have them once again, obviously. Center, guard, edge. We've drafted wide receiver and tackle for them. I don't really see Braden Swinson being a guy, that they grab potentially. I think that they like their kind of bigger linemen. But, maybe I'm wrong. I'm actually going to have them go him here just because of the sheer production that he had. So Braden Swinson to Seattle. Now we look at the Buccaneers, who we had draft Jalen Walker in round 1 as that kind of flashy prospect, that kind of dude that is worthy of a first round pick. Now we kind of look here and we're kind of like linebacker, DB type of thing. I actually do think that I actually do really think here that they would really be willing to go Demetrius Knight and, shore up that, because we know that, their aging linebacker core isn't going to be able to play forever. I'm trying to remember the gentleman's name. Sorry, I'm terrible with names, you guys, if you haven't figured it out, most of the time. But you're going to need to replace him eventually. And he's not going to be able to play forever despite being a very, very good veteran still. And who better to learn from, and you grab Demetrius Knight. Now looking at my Packers once again. So we drafted Higgins, at pick 33. And it's like, addressing the top need, which I think is the jury's still out on it, potentially, depending on a little bit on QB play and a little bit on wide receiver play with such a young wide receiver core. You have edge and cornerback right here. Do we have anybody that is really kind of that dude that I'm like, oh yeah, we grab this guy? I don't really see too many. We'll go ahead and we'll look at these guys. Aladeo, I think, just doesn't do enough and hasn't had the history to warrant a second round pick type of thing. Jared Ivey is a guy that I kind of look at that I'm like, perhaps this guy finds a spot on the line, or something like that as like a flex player. Maybe not, type of thing. Josiah Stewart, too undersized in my opinion. Kyle Kennard, potentially, but not a good pass rush runway. I'm actually more inclined here to have my Packers trade down. And it's like, it's not like you have bad players here. You have some linebackers and some teams with linebacker need type of thing. I do think that would the Bills be interested here? I guess not. So we have Colts and Broncos. The Colts are pretty far down here. And it's like, we've already drafted quite a bit for them. Would they be interested in any of the players here? Maybe they would go linebacker. Maybe we do have them move up to that. So we go to the Colts, and it's like pick 80 from 54. That's going to be some pretty substantial trade compensation. I'm going to put 117 on there as well, and 232 because it's such a move. type of thing. And we're going to draft Schlesinger to the Colts. One of their higher needs, they obviously have, quite a bit of needs type of thing. But it's like, then we get to the Chargers. The Chargers, who we've drafted Kenneth Grant to, will be a stalwart for them. Really need another wide receiver. I think if you're looking at wide receivers right here, I think Kyle Williams would be a kind of high ceiling dude for them with Herbert and provide something that you need. That's a different mold than McConkey, that gives you something else and that you can use and you can grab. And it might be a little bit of a reach to some, but I think Kyle Williams really has the talent and the upside to become, a very good wide receiver in this league, especially with the right quarterback. Now moving on to the Bills. So Michael Williams for the edge on this team. We have linebacker and cornerback. What do we really think about that? I think that, this is a team that, could draft Dorian Porter. I really think that they could. I think he fits a size that they really like. They like their taller guys, to be honest with you. They're kind of tougher guys. And it's like, this guy has a coverage grade that's very, very, very high. And the passer rating was crazy, crazy, crazy low. And it's like, I think that he fits, as an outside corner to this team that will be able to dominate, for years to come on the Bills, and fits, what they want. Looking at the Panthers, we had them draft T-Mac. They'll have one more pick in these next 2 rounds. Edge, wide receiver, and DB, I think is kind of picked upon. I think you look at this team and it's like the number of picks we had 7 picks in total, but it's a big drop off. Perhaps, looking at this, we would want to add, a little bit of a later pick, to be honest with you. And who are the teams that really want to trade here? So we have Ravens, Bills, Cardinals, and Cowboys. So, looking at this, the Ravens are only a couple down, so I don't think you're going to get the draft compensation that you really want. The Bills, we do have right here, might have to trade a pick or 2. But then it's like you look at Cowboys and Cardinals are a bit further down. But it's like, let's go ahead and we trade with the Cowboys. The Cowboys, I think there are picks here at this spot that it's like, from 76 to 57, you go ahead and you grab 149 as well. And then, maybe 217 or something like that, and you take this and, it's accepted. Now we have the Cowboys here, who to me, after drafting Princely and Burden, 2 kind of high ceiling prospect type of things, we're going to go Dylan Sampson, a guy out of, Tennessee, who overall looks like he has the size to be a workhorse back and a speedster type of thing, and, can go in and be possibly that workhorse back. And, obviously the fumbles are an issue and that sort of thing, but I think that this is a guy who screams kind of Jerry Jones. It's like, I feel like he always goes for kind of these high end, kind of prospects type of thing that, like, the ceiling's very high, type of thing. Now we move on to the Texans, a team that we drafted Zabel to address their O-line. I'm kind of looking at this and I'm thinking more O-line. I'm going to go and have them grab Tate Ratledge here. Tate Ratledge, who will be plug and play onto their O-line that desperately needs players, and I think it's a no-brainer pick. The Ravens, we had them go edge, an edge that can big, physical, speedy, strong, everything that you would want type of thing. And then it's like you kind of look to DB. There's not really any DBs right here. There's a good amount of, but there is Azare Thomas, who I think is intriguing, intriguing of a player. Passer rating has only gotten better as years have gone on. Does play corner, has played in the box as well. Not much slot, but you obviously have slot covered with Marlon Humphrey. That taller size that I think, the Ravens are fine with, and we'll go and we'll draft Azare Thomas. Now we get to the Lions, who we had draft edge. I do think that this is a team that really does want to draft another wide receiver, and I think that they want kind of a guy that is taller. And is that Jalen Royals? I don't really think so. Is it Trey Harris? I do think Trey Harris would definitely be someone on the Lions' radar as a taller guy. They kind of need a taller guy to maybe, have Goff be able to throw it too deep and be able to high point it type of thing so he can cut down on the, interceptions to some of these other guys. And that it's like if you put up some 50-50 balls, less chance that they're picked. And that's Trey Harris. Do I think he would go here? I don't really think so. Is there any of these teams that need defensive interior or need a wide receiver or even, edge still? Possibly. Are they any of the teams that are interested? So we have the Raiders, the Patriots, and the Bears. I'm going to have them go Patriots, and we'll go down to 69. 9 picks, but it makes it a little bit more sense. For New England, they have a plethora of picks, though, too. Perhaps they do that and they sweeten the deal, by adding in, 171 here. As we know, the Patriots are usually pretty good at drafting near the end type of thing, and that sort of thing. So we move up here, and it's like our picks with them already. We've grabbed Hampton and Membu. And it's like, but I really do think that this is a team that can definitely draft more edge, to be honest with you, or, and that sort of thing, or even grab wide receiver. And I think that Jalen Royals is a guy that you could definitely look at, or Trey Harris, but I think it's still too early. I'm going to have them go draft Jalen Royals, a guy who can come in, and hopefully bolster that with a bit more talent. Now the Commanders. We had them draft Igbuka, who I think will be a huge help, to help that, short-handed wide receiver room, that has talent but needs more talent. So looking at this, I think that we really do need kind of a running back to be that pound guy. I'm going to go Caleb Johnson. I think Caleb Johnson to Washington makes a lot of sense. A guy who pounds it, is strong, has solid production, and overall can be that upgrade, from, I think it was Johnson that they had, last year, and that they still have, or is it David Robinson? I think it's David Robinson, excuse me. But, moving on to the Bills. The Bills, we had draft edge, and then we had draft cornerback. This is a team that I think really does need a linebacker, but they're also a kind of a team that I'm like, perhaps you also look at safety or defensive interior. I think defensive interior is something on this team that could be improved. And I kind of think, TJ Saunders, he is undersized, but has a very good pass rush win rate. And his run stop isn't that bad as what his, run defense grade is. So it's kind of one of those things that to me, like, this guy looks like he can do a fair bit of everything type of thing. You can line this guy up by Ed Oliver, and he can play that. And it's like, I do think that I do think that you look at TJ Saunders and the Bills, and they don't mind their guys being a little bit undersized, which, they're okay with. Perhaps they go away from that last year, but TJ Saunders seems to me like a guy that would fit on their team. Moving on to the Chiefs, who we had draft tackle because of their, bad O-line situation. I do think it's eventual that they really need to get, pass rush potentially. I do also think that they need safety And Wari is definitely someone that I think they could go with. I would not be surprised if they went a solid guy from Minnesota, coached him up to get lower in his level and to be a dominant guy for the edge of their O-line. So I'm going to go Ursary for them, even though some of these other picks are definitely, intriguing to them. I think Wari would be a good pick, but that's what I'm going to say for that one. Moving on to the Jaguars. So we've had take Jahdae Barron, and we still have, 4 more picks. A crazy number of picks here late in day 2. Because as we're just before the 3rd round. So with this pick, I'm wondering, would Arroyo be their guy? Obviously not a lot of yards per route run. No, not really contested, but a low drop rate. I don't think he's the guy. I think if they were going to keep pass catching tight ends, they wouldn't have moved on from Ingram for nothing, type of thing. I think this is a team, though, that does, we had them draft Jahdae Barron, but I think they need competition for edge rush. I think you go ahead, or maybe not competition, but just to bolster, their, the inside. I think you go Jared Ivey here. Bold take, but you plug him in with Hines and Walker, all at the same time, and you've got kind of a lethal pass rush that could be, you could scheme and you could do a lot of wild things with, for the Jaguars, who, to me, there was this games that I was like, what is this pass rush? Trayvon Walker and Hines, like what happened? Type of thing. But moving on to the Giants, who we had draft Carter and Amos, I think that this is a team that definitely needs, they say they need QB. We don't really have QBs available, but hey, what am I saying? Jalen Milroe has been kind of talked about quite a bit, like as a potential guy that it's like to do things with, yards per attempt, athletic kid or whatever, most physically gifted. You obviously also have, Jackson Dart's gotten people talking about him type of thing. It's interesting. He has a better pressure grade and all of that sort of thing. More yards type of thing. It's kind of interesting and intriguing if you are a Giant and you still have Milroe or Dart here. I don't think you're really looking at Howard or Leonard, to be honest with you. It's kind of one of those things that it's kind of wild to me that you look at Jackson Dart and his average draft position is right here. It's like, is some team really going to take any of these kids as a backup? No, I don't think so. But it's like, is anyone going to take them really that high? It's kind of asinine to me. I'm going to have them take Jalen Milroe, top of the 3rd round, to be their QB of the future potentially. And hopefully he doesn't listen to Russell Wilson that much. But then we go and we have Tennessee. We have Tennessee having traded this pick to the Chiefs, and the Chiefs are right here with 2 picks, and all we've addressed is O-line, which I'm okay with. This O-line is bad. Now, I think it would be kind of a underhanded thing, but a potential thing for this team to grab a tall wide receiver. They don't really have that. Trey Harris on the table potentially. But is there any other guys here that you're kind of looking at that it's like, potentially you grab, big slot type Arroyo, perhaps this is a guy who could come in and play and that sort of thing. So, would he be able to play? I'm actually going to have him draft Arroyo here because he happened to go this far down, as a prospect type of thing. And perhaps he gives them another dynamic, as we all know that Kansas City finds creative ways to use their tight ends and get them open type of thing. And it's like, I feel like another tight end in there and people are like, what are we going to expect from Kansas City this year? As I think they might potentially draft a wide receiver, but it's going to be in the later rounds. Moving on to the Browns, who we had draft, both guys out of, you know, out of Colorado. Sorry. I think that at this point, you're kind of looking at wide receiver. I'm actually going to have them draft Trey Harris. I know we moved the Lions back because they were like, hey, we may be able to get him here. But, perhaps that comes back to punish them. And they're thinking, oh, no, these other teams aren't going to grab him type of thing. I think you could go Emin Wari if you're, as a guy who can move around, can play the slot quite a bit, and has had very solid grades, good missed tackle rate, and good coverage type of thing, and great size, a big slot. He's got very good athleticism. You know what? Heck, we'll go him and Maury here, and we'll put him with the Browns, as much as it hates me to put him there, to be honest, if that actually did happen. But he's kind of the prospect to me that it's like a boomer bust, and then the Browns seem like a leap of faith organization, to be honest with you. The Raiders. We got the Raiders here having drafted Ginty and Revel, two guys to me that scream Raider Nation. And, we still kind of need a wide receiver. Trey Harris, we're going to draft him. He's going to be our big, tall wide receiver, and we're going to nab him from the Lions, who would likely be to take him here. And we're going to kind of look and see that, hey, these guys only drafted an edge. They still kind of need, a wide receiver, like I said, as well as a linebacker. And to me, Jalen Noel is someone who's very intriguing. He is a, guy who I guess fits kind of, a similar mold to what they already have. But, grade versus man coverage is very high, and that's kind of what you'll want on a team like this, where it's like you're going to have high-flying players, and then they're going to be high possession guys, which is what they like. And, this guy has had more production every single year, type of thing. And is and can play all over the place, has played wide and mostly in the slot, but I don't think having a double slot is a hindrance in today's league, to be honest with you, as it is the easiest to get open, and you can have, a double dual slot threat. So Jalen Noel to, the Lions to address a need. Now we move on to the Jaguars. We have 3 more picks, and we've addressed defense. I think they would be a team that would be interested in Noel potentially, but it's like here we have, kind of a safety need where it's like we have Makuba, here, who had a very good forced incompletion rate and played very, very, very solid, deep play last year, which I think, you saw him get kind of gorged, some games, a little undersized, but if you're only playing the pass, size doesn't really come into it. It's about whether your hand's in the right place at the right time, you guys. So we're going to have them go here because Makuba, very good deep safety. Moving on to the Saints. We've had go offense and defense. Mason Graham, a huge pick for them. Jack Beck, potential guy to be a good depth piece, on their team. Is this the time, to me, where you're going to go QB and you go Jackson Dart here? I'm actually going to say no, you guys. I think that Spencer Rattler would be a guy that, they would be willing to roll with at least for a year to test him out and see if they can, kind of get his potential back up as a kind of spicy pick last year. So I'm going to say no. Now, does Travion Henderson go here? Potentially, getting better each year in terms of yards. His receiving yards good as well, which I think they always value over in New Orleans. I'm going to have him go Travion Henderson to be that guy, to be kind of the change of pace and to be the dude that you can swap back and forth with. To swap back and forth with, Alvin Kamara. We get to the Bears who haven't drafted halfback. They probably would have been happy with Travion Henderson type of thing. Would they trade up? Potentially. But we've went, two defense and then a guard, because I think that is something that they need. Would Judkins be a guy that they would be interested in? I'm not so sure. He does have kind of a Montgomery build, being a little bit taller and heavier, north to sup, speed to power. However, he doesn't have, his offensive line obviously had to be good. He could definitely struggle type of thing. Do they have the O-line that they feel confident about this guy with? Potentially not. We have RJ Harvey, though, as well, who has a crazy high elusive rating type of thing, but isn't a guy that is your workhorse kind of back, is a little bit older too, missed tackles, and, can also be a rush average and receiver. He's obviously, got kind of the weight to be kind of a workhorse back, but is a stockier guy. I am going to say that RJ Harvey could definitely be a guy to go to the Bears, and that, you go play for Ben Johnson. He's going to do something creative things to make sure that you're able to use your explosiveness to the best of your ability. Looking at the Jets, right here, we've drafted an edge and a tackle. I wouldn't put it past him to grab Restrepo here. I think Restrepo could come in, and while he's a similar size to Garrett Wilson, I think, he's a strong slot receiver, and I think Garrett Wilson can play just about anywhere, and it's like this guy is mostly slot, not much wide, but has had, very consistent production, which, is kind of what you want, and has gotten better in terms of TDs and that sort of thing. And, very good contested catch and low drop rate, which I think you're just going to need when your quarterback is Justin Fields. So we're going to go Restrepo here, and then we're moving on to New England. We've obviously drafted a wide receiver, a halfback, and a tackle. I think that the defense will get improved on its own. I think it's not far removed from having Belichick as their coach, obviously. So it's like, and I think that you look at, goodness, why can't I remember his name? Their coach now. God, I see his face and I can't figure his name. But he's going to have the defense coached up to a place that's going to be at least, borderline acceptable. It's not like they were terrible last year either. I want to point that out, that it's like people were like, oh, he took a step back. There was an overall kind of opinion that they weren't the defense that they were, type of thing. But it's like they have the pieces. I do think that they could definitely improve on there. And I'm looking at a couple of guys here. I think Shamar Turner, who was once kind of touted as a guy to be, potentially very good, interior guy, and it's like they moved him around so damn much, perhaps he's a guy that comes in and he doesn't have to produce right away, but they can find out what his, niche is. And that is why I think that he's dropped this much. And he seems like that kind of smart Patriot pick where they're like, oh, this guy's developed into one of the top defensive interior guys in the league in a couple of years or something nuts, Looking at San Fran, we've addressed the defense quite a bit. I do think you could address offense with another running back potentially, which I think that they will do. I don't think right now that there's anybody that's like, hey, we grab this dude. Judkins, probably not. Damian Martinez, potentially. I do like this guy, as, big-bodied guy who's powerful but also fast and has obviously had the workload of a workhorse back, type of thing. But potentially, for right now, maybe not. But maybe. I'm kind of looking at it as like, insurance because you may need a guy besides McCaffrey. If McCaffrey can never return to being fully healthy, and you're obviously it doesn't seem like it doesn't seem like they're going to trade him. You know, he's just too good of a player when he plays. But I'm going to have him draft Damian Martinez here. Might be unpopular as like, oh yeah, there's other needs on this team, but I'm going to have him go Damian Martinez as I think that there is some late round, you know, tackles and guards that they can grab, you know, type of thing. Now we move on to Carolina, who it's like only 2 picks in these first, you know, 3 rounds, you know, kind of terrible, but they do have obviously quite a bit number of picks left, you know, type of thing for trading back with New England. I think this is a team that it's like, you know, you have T-Mac, you know, you now have, and it's like now you have this pick. I think with the number of picks that you have, you do not mind, you know, some of these guys available. We're going to look at edge, and you guys already kind of know what I think about Aladeo. I don't think he has, you know, the size that you really want to be a guy that's like, oh, you pull in and you plug and play him type of thing. They don't need a running back. Josiah Stewart has a crazy high pass rush win rate, just does not have, you know, the amount of snaps that you maybe had wanted to see. But he's a high ceiling, you know, kind of on the smaller size type of player. But, you know, doesn't have ideal measurables. But like I said, you know, I don't think measurables are always the be all end all of it all. You know, off ball Sam linebacker, but it's kind of interesting here. Do they go him? Maybe, maybe not. CJ West, a guy, you know, very good size, burst, and that sort of thing. This is a guy that I do think the defensive interior would be very good, you know, to have and that sort of thing with a good, you know, who's obviously, you know, last year he didn't have, you know, a good, you know, kind of pass rapport for a guy who's not known as a pass rapport kind of guy. But it's like, you know, very good size, very good interior. I'm actually going to go CJ West here to this team. You know, even though they say that interior isn't a need, you know, I honestly think that, you know, besides Brown, I think that you need another guy in there that's going to be able to do and contribute something, you know, type of thing. Now we do have another Patriot pick. You know, we just drafted Shamar Turner. We obviously have had a plethora of picks, you know, to be able to grab here. And then it's like the need to me on this team, you know, maybe we do draft like a linebacker, you know, type of thing. You know, I do think that we do go for another kind of tackle potentially, you know. Trapilo is right here. Chris Paul Jr., we're falling into that range. I mean, they don't list linebacker as a need, but it's kind of one of those things that I do think that they need. Trapilo, the only problem is that he's lean for a guy who's 6'8", you know, type of thing. But it's like you kind of look at Chris Paul Jr., and I think that this guy could be a very, very good coverage linebacker. And it's like, you know, plays very, very, very well. Low missed tackle rate, coverage grade good, run defense good, you know, and just, you know, great run defense actually. And then it's like coverage grade good, average depth of run tackle. You know, this is very good. And this guy's a spark plug of a player, clearly doesn't mind, you know, getting in there despite his kind of smaller size, but he's barely undersized in my opinion. So we're going to go ahead and draft Chris Paul to this team because I think he screams Patriot. Moving on, Cardinals. Edge, interior, all D-line picks. I think this is a team that does need cornerback help, but we don't really have anybody right here that I'm like, do we grab, you know, type of thing. Oladejo, no. They don't need running back. Josiah Stewart, no. You know, we already got interior with Harmon. Kyle Kennard, probably not. Trapilo, you know, I hate to say it, but it's just like too tall for Kyler Murray to see over. Marcus Mabau, you know, is tall as well. And I guess small, you know, type of thing. He should get a shot to start at guard or tackle. I do think that at times the line was questionable. And I'm going to have them go and draft Marcus Mabau, who can maybe develop into a potential starting tackle if he puts on a little bit of size and, start at guard for the Cardinals. Moving on to Miami. I'm sorry. No, from Miami. God, I keep on reading the text. We obviously have addressed O-line quite a bit with the Texans, but as we all know, their O-line is, that type of thing. Perhaps this is a team that would not mind taking a shot on Trapilo, because you look at kind of the rest of these, it's like, I guess we have tight end. We have Mason Taylor here, who to be honest, I don't really know. Is a good size, young, type of thing. Doesn't have the contested catch rate that you would really want, and the run block isn't as good. Drop rate is very, very low, though. I do think that you could overall go a guy like this, and this could give you another receiving option, more of a possession guy with obviously the crazy low drop rate that played for a big school against top talent. Could work obviously on this, but like the yards, a reception, solid. Just looks like a guy that maybe, he needs the right, right system type of thing. And I think that, Mason Taylor could become somewhat of a weapon, and you could move him around and scheme him open on third and short situations. Now we are on to my Packers. As we all know, we drafted Jaden Higgins in the second round. Now we are to the third, and we have 2 more picks after this, type of thing. I think this is a spot where you're kind of looking, at some of these, edge rushers. Are they the size, though, that is liked by Goody? And are they going to be able to do both things? So, maybe not. Defensive interior, Alfred Collins. I think this guy, has a run defense grade is very, very high. Not really much pass rush, but does have some hurries, type of thing. I think that, you look at a guy like this, a big bodied, strong guy like this, can play anywhere from 0 technique to 5 technique. So, very versatile type of thing that can move around. I think that this guy would be welcome on the Jeff Hafley defense. Now we go to the Bengals. The Bengals, we've obviously drafted, an edge and a tackle, both out of Ohio State, funny enough. I think that, this is a team that, while they don't say it here, I think they are in the market for a halfback. Now, would Judkins be the guy that they would overall want, I guess, type of thing? I think it's, I think the thing with Judkins that I think is that, like, do you have the O-line? And I don't think that is the Bengals type of thing. We drafted an edge for them. Perhaps we could draft another edge, or perhaps we could draft a tackle that, maybe you're willing to take a lark on. Perhaps you would want a center as well, that could play, elsewhere. Obviously, Jared Wilson, hasn't played much else, but he hasn't given up much, in terms of pressures or hurries and that sort of thing. And he is, a solid size. So, and that sort of thing. I think that if, Burrow works with this guy, I think having a good QB that knows what he's kind of talking about and a guy that you can talk to would very much help a guy like Jared Wilson. We're going to have him go, Jared Wilson right here. The Seahawks, we've had draft, O-line, edge, and wide receiver. I think this is a spot where it's like you're kind of looking, maybe for a little bit of depth. I think they would be a team that would be willing to kind of grab Trapilo and maybe even play him inside. He's a guy that obviously is a bit leaner with being just shy of 310 and 6'8", but it's like, he could definitely, being a solid tackle for the run scheme and that sort of thing, which I think that they kind of need. I think that they could draft Trapilo here. Now we go to the Steelers, who have drafted Calvin Banks to help their O-line. I think that they still need other guys to help their O-line. Is there really anybody here what is some of the needs they have? Obviously, QB, running back, maybe. I don't think Judkins goes here. I think you look at some of these guys and it's like, tackle and safety. We do have a couple of, we have a safety right here, Ransom, which, played for a big school, 6'1", 210, played box deep, a little bit of the slot, which is also good. Run defense grade really high. That's something that I think they love on Pittsburgh. We're going to have him go here and do that to kind of be a guy that they can plug in and play low with Minkah Fitzpatrick high. Looking at the Buccaneers, we had them take Jalen Walker and then Demetrius Knight, kind of doubling down on two different types of linebackers. Are they a team that now would take an edge? I think there is a shot at it, but I don't really think that they're, I don't think that they're crazy about getting a guy who's a crazy edge player. Maybe Jack Sawyer. I think he's kind of one of the last that he's like a very good size and could definitely go here. Definitely seems like a Buccaneer. Let's grab Jack Sawyer, to address this after, in the third round after they did address it by getting former Eagle and then went to the Jets last year. I can't remember his name. But the Broncos, running back, wide receiver, center, defensive interior. We got Scatabo, we got Starks. I do think that this is a team that really does need wide receivers or anybody that I'm kind of like high on right here. Not really. All these guys are kind of a little bit later. And it's like, I think for this team, I think you're looking for a dude who's kind of very versatile, high impact player line in the backfield or as a returner. So it's like the stats obviously aren't anything crazy. You're kind of talking about potential here, but contested catch rate very, very high. They obviously have a very strong contested catcher in Cortland Sutton, but this guy kind of adds an even bigger, higher level type of thing. Tesla, another tall guy, but a speedster. Torrey Horton's smaller. I don't think that they would really go for him. Perhaps Isaiah Bond. I don't really see it, but Savion Williams to me, could be a very, very, very intriguing pick for anybody, at a certain kind of time. And obviously, the next pick that they have available, 122, they probably miss out on this guy. I am going to go ahead and have them draft Savion Williams because I think that it's such a big need. And I think that this guy can come in and he can be kind of a situational red zone type guy for Bo Nix as they struggled in the red zone a little bit last year, despite his accuracy and that sort of thing. I think they lack kind of a guy that's like, oh, we're willing to just throw it up for this dude in a 1v1 situation. Moving on to the Chargers. So the Chargers, we had draft Kyle Williams and Kenneth Grant. They are a team to me that it's like you could draft tight end. Does Terrence Ferguson, scream a guy that you would want? He is big. He is strong, and that sort of thing. Obviously doesn't have, the run block grade that you want and that sort of thing. Doesn't have any crazy production, but has had very good and does match kind of the yards. Maybe his drops are kind of a concern. Where do we look here for the Chargers? I do think it's another potential chance for us to draft edge potentially, to this team. Does Josiah Stewart go here? A guy who, smaller, but high boomer bust potential. Heck, I think we go Josiah Stewart here. And I think that, because he played under Harbaugh for the Wolverines, he's a guy who would more than be interested in, more than likely. Onto my Packers. We've had them draft Higgins and then Alfred Collins to address the interior. We have a couple more picks here, type of thing. I don't think that there's really kind of a guy to me that screams, hey, we're going to go here. I do think that this is a team that could definitely draft tackle, because Rasheed Walker is leaving, and that's been a huge, draft kind of thing. And to me, the Packers are always looking. They're always looking, to grab guys that are versatile. This guy's played both right and left tackle type of thing, and even guard at one point, and has a very good pass block grade. I think this is a guy that you could go and you could grab and, potentially not battle likely this year, but it's like you mold into at least a good depth piece, in this round. As the Packers, to me, they don't have a crazy amount of picks, or sort of needs. They just have a few key spots, and if you get guys that hit, then this is a dangerous team. The Jaguars, we have drafted a corner, a safety, and an edge. Obviously haven't really addressed the kind of wide receiver need, even though there's not really that many people in this range. I am going to say that I think that this is a team that does need, line help, and at this point, you're kind of looking at Wyatt Millam and Cameron Williams, type of thing. I think Wyatt Millam, despite not having, I guess, super high projected and playing left tackle quite a bit, is a guy that would be fine to add to your team. So we're going to go there. Then we move on to the Texans. Obviously have dressed, O-line quite a bit, and even the tight end need that they have. I think that this is a team, that you could look at Vernon Broughton here, potentially a guy to strengthen the pass rush, but has good size, has good pass rush win rate, and pressured quite a lot. Last year, obviously, getting in more games than his previous 2 years and getting better every single year. I don't think it is, a stretch to say that you try to make your great defense even greater with a piece that how are they going to use this guy? With no tackler guards really that are kind of hey, do we grab this guy? With Cameron Williams, to me, being kind of a unique guy that's not for every team. The Rams, tight end, tackle, linebacker, and CB. We've obviously addressed tight end. We have 2 more picks here in the next 11. To me, they're a team, that probably needs to go cornerback here, even though I don't think that their corners played as bad as this is kind of projecting. I'm going to go ahead and say that they actually draft Cameron Williams to get a stronger O-line. I think the Rams have always been a team that likes to have bigger linemen. I think of Havenstein. I think of Whitworth was big. I just think that they're a team that it's been popular for them to have those kinds of guys, and that Cameron Williams fits with them. Looking at the Ravens, James Pierce, Azare Thomas. Could we go another edge? I honestly do see it with this team. I'm looking kind of here and I'm thinking who is another guy? Who is a guy to me that it's could really kind of, change his team? We obviously have already drafted DB. Dorian Strawn's up here, slightly close to this pick. Grabbing tackle wouldn't be kind of a huge thing that, the best teams really do kind of look at their tackles. And this guy's a very solid size, good pass block grade, good run block grade, only played left tackle, but should, you look at the history of their left tackle position, and Stanley, he's gotten hurt. He was fully healthy last year, but are you going to have the same? Is it going to be the same this year? This guy could be his backup, and he could be that guy that hey, we feel good about our backup, and we solidify that position on an already strong team. Now with the final kind of Seattle pick, we've addressed tackle a couple times, edge, wide receiver, type of thing. What is something that I think this team needs that is kind of like, you're not really thinking about, I know people aren't really thinking about tight end with the Seattle, but I honestly think it might be an option. It's like you get rid of Metcalf, you don't really have that kind of tall target. And then it's like you have Harold Fanning Jr., who's kind of a guy that's more of a big kind of wide receiver type of dude, that it's like maybe you go and you plug him or you find some creative ways for him. Very solid yards per route run. Obviously went to, the Bowling Green Falcons. Wouldn't it be kind of interesting to see a Falcon become a Seahawk, in a way that had a very high grade and very solid production? He's kind of, to me, screams Seattle, type of thing. And it's like, so we're going to go Harold Fanning here, as I think it addresses a need that that they're not willing to acknowledge here. On a guy that it's like, hey, he can fit right here. Then we go to the Saints. We've obviously drafted kind of the halfback of the future, a wide receiver, defensive interior. Let's kind of look at the O-line. There's edges here, but it's kind of, to me, like, oh, you don't really need that. I do like Anthony Belton, to this team. I think they don't address it here like they do with a lot of different teams, in my opinion. And it's just, it's kind of one of those things. And now back to the Packers. To me, we drafted Savannah, Alfred Collins, Jaden Higgins, type of thing. And then, obviously people are like, well, you haven't drafted an edge. You haven't really looked at edge that much. But to me, it just doesn't scream, edge rusher to me with, any of these picks. Kyle Kennard, not a very good pass rusher, right? Elijah Roberts, maybe, but he's, a guy who's designed more for a 3-4 scheme and, an interior type of thing. He's obviously lined up mostly outside tackle, where he's had very good grades. His first year, he just didn't play that much, to be honest with you. But it's like, not a lot. A good amount of productions. Maybe we do go Elijah Roberts, and it's kind of a unique grab where it's like, oh, we draft Elijah Roberts, and overall he's a guy that, like, oh, you use in unique situations. But to me, I think the Packers are happy with who they have on the inside, and he could be an interior kind of pass rusher, but that's not what he was used for. So it's kind of one of those oddball picks that's like, I'll draft him because I think that he does kind of wow in terms of like the size and the length and that sort of thing, and different alignments type of thing. But it's one of those things that it's like, maybe they find a use for him, which I'm sure Halfley will if he played. Now we move on to Kansas City. We've drafted a lot of linemen. Elijah Arroyo, who's kind of an interesting intrigue pick that I think that Kansas City could get the most out of him. With this last pick here, do we have anything where it's like we're going to grab, certain players here? Not really. Yeah, I could definitely see this team trading down from this pick. Perhaps that is what I'm going to have them do. We have a good bit amount of edges right here. Is there any team that really, to me, needs an edge that it's like are willing to grab here? Are the Dolphins? Is there anybody that's actually, there's no teams that are actually like interested, because I think at this point in the draft, you're kind of like, we know what our picks are, we know what our strategy is and who our guys are. I think if you're Kansas City, maybe you are looking at, a halfback that it's like, oh, if we coach up our own line, maybe he could be good for us. Would it be Judkins? I don't know about that. And it's like, I think that they're willing to wait with Pacheco and to see if he returns to form after his injury. Maybe DJ Giddens. I think Giddens is, a guy who it's like good size and, good vision and patience type of thing would maybe give them, something else at running back that they don't have. Obviously needs a little bit more physicality, but it's like maybe they can find a use in a situation for them. And I do know that the thing about the Chiefs is they like their halfbacks, and I don't, I'm gonna take DJ Giddens here as a guy who maybe he's a guy who's smart with the ball and can do things on third down or in the receiving game with his patience and being smart as he is. Now we have the Jaguars, and it's like, to me, we've drafted an edge, a cornerback, a safety, a tackle, kind of positions of need and that sort of thing. Is there someone here that it's like they could go? Would Dorian Strawn be a guy that they would be willing to grab? Nothing crazy in terms of grades, but low passer rating. And it's like, if you can get, kind of, this kind of passer rating, and obviously not this is unrealistic, but it's like Dorian Strawn is a guy who it's like maybe Strawn, ironically, lacks some strength in press man coverage and run even situations, but smart, good zone scheme type of thing, and very disruptive. I just think that that's something that, the Jaguars could value, and he can play outside and can play a zone type of coverage. Now we get to the Vikings who it's like, we had them address their D-line, perhaps they're a team that actually goes with Judkins, which I can definitely see. Perhaps this is a guy that they don't even start right away. I think that their O-line is pretty good on their team, and I think that they can, use a year to kind of like evaluate and judge Judkins on whether he's a guy to be focal, as I do think he can do good behind the right O-line. I think that is the Vikings. Miami Dolphins, we've addressed, defense. I don't think that they're going to trade Tyreek. I think that they're just going to, see what this year holds type of thing. I think they're a team that they do need O-line, which we haven't really addressed, but there just hasn't really been, kind of a play here for that, excuse me, the nearest, kind of O-line is kind of like down, type of thing. We don't really have that here, but this is a team that I think that they do need, more pass rush. I find it odd that it doesn't say edge here. They weren't anything like crazy, but it's like, I'm going to take another look, I guess, in gander at these. Does Kyle Kennard kind of scream that he's got the length type of thing? So maybe they take him, and perhaps, they think that he's gonna, help their pass rush, which was, kind of iffy and that sort of thing, that had, a low run stop win rate, but had, a good amount of hurries and, production these last 2 years. So with 4 picks remaining, we have the Giants who, we had take Milrow, Trey Amos, and Abdul Carter. Kind of good picks, in my opinion. And then you're kind of looking at, who's available here. They do say they need tackle and defensive interior as well. And we have Jordan Phillips here. I think Jordan Phillips is a guy that it's like, good size, obviously not as big as, Sexy Dexy type of thing, but can really provide a heavy, strong interior that has a decent pass rush win rate. Not a crazy amount of like actual like pressure type of thing, but, has played a good amount inside and can be your pick to pair alongside Dexter Lawrence. Potentially. The 49ers. We've had grab, a position need that I could see them grabbing, a couple on the defensive side, and we have a lot of edges here. Now, I kind of look at RJ Mickens here, as a guy that I'm like, oh, very good, coverage grade, not so much, but I think that's what they really need. I think that they really need coverage. I think that they really need, coverage and that sort of thing on this team. And I think that RJ Mickens, well, and it's like missed tackle rating wasn't the worst type of thing, provides a very good size. And it's like, Saleh can get this guy to playing better and tackling better. Now we got the Rams. The Rams, who we had at draft Loveland, snipe him, Cameron Williams for their line, big-bodied guy. And we're kind of moving on here. Who is kind of a guy to me that kind of looks like he could be a dude that this team grabs? They need a linebacker. Kind of looking at all these, I'm kind of like, they don't really need edge, Jamari Caldwell, defensive interior, potentially, type of thing with solid run defense, big size, Hurry's very, very good, got better last year, playing more games type of thing, and had 6 sacks a couple of seasons ago. But, I'm kind of looking at, Jeffrey, Bassa here, or maybe, or maybe even, goodness, Jeffrey Bassa here wouldn't be a bad option, I think. I think that you need, more. I think you need just more depth there in your linebacker room, on this team. And Jeffrey Bassa, to me, missed tackle rate, not the best, but, played in the box, allowed 7, isn't the best coverage guy. But overall, former safety who's been kind of coming down and has now, now been playing, down in the box and that sort of thing, and has been moved around quite a lot, but I'd like to see him settle into kind of a more standard role in the linebacker position, type of thing. It's not, nice coverage linebacker type of thing, which I don't know if they would need. I'm kind of, second guessing it type of thing. Jonas Sanker, to me, a safety. Safeties, they I think it's kind of a need, type of thing. But it's like I'm looking here and it's kind of one of those things that I'm like, who do these guys grab? What is a need that this team needs? You do have Seth McLaughlin here, who I wouldn't mind them going, type of thing. Good size, due to injury type of thing, maybe they do take, maybe they do take a guy like this who obviously had a good amount of experience and was getting better and didn't allow a lot of sort of pressures type of thing, but I at this point, it's kind of a crapshoot, I feel like, with who these teams would go and who they really value and what positions they want to go with. The Lions. So the Lions here, who we've had draft Noel and Shamar Stewart. This is a team that I think, maybe I could have had them, go up, more and more and more type of thing. I do think that they need corner, to be honest with you. The linebackers right here, let's have them grab Bassa and, a guy who can play coverage and to kind of solidify that linebacker room that, let's get real, they had. Okay, but it's kind of one of those that it's like, if you guys want to, look over, the draft and that sort of thing. Obviously, this is kind of my first round, an interesting first round where, we had a couple of picks, some picks that I think are really plausible. Shedeur falling to the Browns down here, which I do think is actually possible. They bring in Shedeur and Travis Hunter, where it's like, I could definitely see it. I mean, do we think that the Giants are really that locked in to grab Shedeur, at pick 3 and leave Abdul Carter on the board, type of thing where it's like they could grab somebody else at another time in the pick. Now, I know this was a long one, 3 rounds, not easy. And, to me, kind of hard, I don't know these players by the back of my hand type of thing. I do my best to analyze and try to think of like, oh, would this team be interested in this guy, type of thing. But, if you guys made it this far, you ended up watching the whole thing, or, you kind of skimmed to the end to see who I picked, through various times, I'd love to see your opinion and see what you would say, because there are definitely some teams in here that I think are going to be somewhat aggressive, and go after certain picks, and that sort of thing, and this definitely probably, somewhat wouldn't be, but I think I drafted guys where I think that they will at least be drafted at certain picks, to certain teams, and how teams will be like, be this way and that, and that sort of thing. But tell me what you think down in the comments. Leave a like, comment, subscribe. It would mean a lot. Next week I'm thinking, I'm not sure what I'm going to do for the Tuesday video, yet, or that sort of thing. Maybe it's my, my favorite prospects in this draft or something like that. Maybe a fun video, after doing some research and that sort of thing. But I want to thank you guys all for watching, and as always, go Pack Go.